Hey there, this is Chapter 4. Would you turn in your book to page 87? I want you to see this chapter in brief. Every chapter has this, and it gives you basic, really important points for each of the sections throughout the chapter. And it's a good resource to use, not just in this chapter, but in all the chapters. So your job is to take notes and stop the webcast if you need to and listen to it again or ask me questions, but that's your job, is to listen, to learn, and to take good notes. All right, we've talked about the framers of the Constitution before. They had to come up with some sort of compromise between a Confederate government. Remember, that's where the power is all spread out. That was one option. The other option was that they could have a unitary government. Remember that unitary means having all government power located in one place. So instead of one of those two things, they came up with this idea of federalist government. Remember what federalist government means? Yeah, it means having power divided between a central government and several regional governments. This decision caused federal and state government to exist. Those two blanks are federal and state. Each level has its own powers, agencies, and each level acts directly on the people through laws and officials. Think about this for a second. You get pulled over after school for running a stop sign. You're going to get pulled over by the local police, the CPD, right? One level acting over you. Different scenario. You get pulled over after school for running the stop sign. During the citation, they discover that you have drugs and firearms in your trunk. All of a sudden, you've got different levels of government acting on you. You'll have the CPD, the local law agency. Okay, you'll also have probably FBI or who knows who all show up if you've got drugs and guns in your trunk. But anyway, that's one example of how law enforcement agencies or powers or people or laws, how they all can act on you together. It's not just the state, it's not just the local, it's not just the federal, it can be multiple. All right, division of powers is addressed in the blank amendment. You guys just took and did really awesome on a test. You remember what amendment talks about division of powers? Take a look at page 89. It tells you right there. It's the 10th Amendment. Page 89, first column, it says, the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively, or to the people. Okay, basically, any power or law that's not specifically given to the federal government is then reserved for the state. And this causes dual government, each government operating over the same people at the same time. All right, let's get back to that for just a second. All right, this division of powers is really important. We've talked about federal government. We've talked about federalism. We're back to this whole idea of federalism, having different levels of government responsible for different things, different levels of government having different power. It was one of the many ways the Founding Fathers kept power divided. Remember, they were very, very concerned that nobody has too much power. Federalism encourages local choice in most matters, but there must be strength in the national government. The book gives some examples about this. They give examples like natural disasters in a state, where people depend on federal, state, and local governments for help. Do you remember Hurricane Katrina? Hit New Orleans, it was devastating, and people at that point were looking for help from anybody that could bring it. Okay, it was so much bigger than a local government issue. It was so much bigger than even the state. They were looking for the federal government to come in and help. That's a really good example. It's nice to have local government. Okay, your issues here in Collierville are way different than issues elsewhere, so it's nice to have a local government to help meet your needs. Okay, if there's a windstorm in Collierville and some trees get knocked over, Collierville government's going to take care of that. But if it's something bigger, a tornado, a hurricane, a flood, it might require a strong national government to come in and help. I know that there's going to be a question on the test about where do local governments get their power. Okay, Collierville has a local government, Germantown, Bartlett, pretty much every place has a local government. And that's because local governments are mentioned in state constitutions and state laws. We just spent a long time talking about the national constitution, but did you know that every state has their own constitution? And in there it says things like local towns, villages, cities, whatever, may have local governments. So you've got a mayor joiner, you've got aldermen, you've got local government that takes care of local things, and that is wonderful. In fact, they do so much more for us on a daily basis than either of the other two levels of government. Okay, but it's also really nice to know that there's a national government that can come in and really help us if we need it. If you haven't noticed already, there's a ton of different powers. The vocabulary for this chapter is on page 110. If you want to flip there just real quickly, you're going to see oodles of powers. Okay, and so that's what we're going to talk about more today, to sort of rip the Band-Aid off, introduce you to all the different powers, and then give you some days to digest it. First one is delegated powers. Delegated powers are those that are granted in the Constitution. I'm back on page 89. There are 3 different types of delegated powers, and here we go. The first one is probably the easiest. They're called expressed powers. They're the ones that are spelled out or written down in the Constitution. They're the ones that you wrote down last week in your Constitution outline. These are the ones that are actually physically written in the Constitution. Because of that, they're sometimes called enumerated powers. To enumerate means to write. You're probably enumerating right now. You're supposed to be enumerating notes during this podcast, webcast, whatever, okay? So because they're physically written out, they're also called enumerated powers. So example, Article 2, Section 2. Okay, it's enumerated, it's expressed that the president has certain powers. Okay, those are called express powers. And like I said, I think they're the easiest because they're the ones that are physically spelled out, written down. But remember, the Constitution has so little detail that the Constitution is going to say things like, Congress may create inferior courts. All right, well, that's great. An inferior court is lower than the Supreme Court, but it doesn't give us any more detail. What kind of courts? How many courts? Where should they be? It doesn't give us any of that detail. And because of that, we have these other powers called implied powers. It says these powers are not stated in the Constitution. They're not written down, but they're reasonably suggested by what is written down. They're reasonably suggested by the expressed powers. These are so much more fluid. They're not actually written down anywhere. Okay, you take the thing that's expressed, which is Congress may create inferior courts, and then you use the implied powers. Congress has to say, all right, what kind of courts? Oh, a tax court? That sounds great. A veterans court? That sounds great. They have to come up with the rest of it. Okay, this is sometimes called the necessary and proper clause, as in Congress is allowed to make any laws that are necessary and proper to get those expressed powers completed. It's sometimes called the elastic clause. Okay, think of a rubber band. It can stretch, right? Okay, these implied powers, because they're not written down, can be stretched to meet any situation. They're very much like an elastic rubber band. When Alex and I first got married, we went to his family's Thanksgiving, and they all dress up real nice and like they're going to church, and that's fine. And they're wonderful people. But it was so different than my family, because my family, you show up wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt and you're ready to eat. Well, that's one of my favorite days. I love Thanksgiving. Plus, you've got that elastic waistband so you can eat that second piece of pie or that third piece of pie. It stretches to meet the situation. Okay, same thing here. Because implied powers are not written down, they can be stretched. All right, so example, it is expressed that Congress is to take care of our infrastructure, okay? Infrastructures are roads, bridges, dams, whatever, okay? But all it says is Congress shall take care of infrastructure. It is implied then that they will build dams and they will build and maintain interstate highway systems, okay? It is expressed that Congress shall keep the peace. It is implied, then, that they will prohibit racial discrimination, something that is not very peaceful. All right, the third type of delegated power is over on page 91. It's called inherent powers. Inherent powers, it says those powers that belong to the national government because they are the national government of a sovereign state. Okay? These are powers that belong to the nation because they are the highest level of government. Okay, they're the highest level of government, and they're the level of government that touches every single American. Okay, think about it. Collierville, Tennessee government just affects the people in Collierville. Tennessee state government only affects the people living in Tennessee. Federal government, the national government, affects every single person in our country. Inherent powers are those that have historically belonged to the national level. Okay, the book gives some examples. They talk about deporting aliens or foreigners that aren't supposed to be here. Okay, that's an inherent power. It belongs to the federal government. Why? Because they're the federal government, and it wouldn't make sense for any other level of government to be in charge of deporting aliens. Another example from the book is the power to acquire territories. Maybe that's a new national park, or maybe it's a new state. It belongs to the national government. The national government's in charge of admitting a 51st state. Why? Because that's their job. They're the national government. It wouldn't make sense for Tennessee or even Collierville to say, yes, come on, Puerto Rico, be our 51st state. All right? So those are the delegated powers. We're halfway through. Come back at you in just a couple minutes for some more.